I started UB40 to promote reggae, and they're punching off that name at the moment.
We've come to a point where we've got to defend ourselves from the shit coming out of his mouth.
Because I was asking questions, they started to demonise me, but I couldn't get any information. To this day, I still don't know what happened to the money.
It wouldn't surprise me at all if he believes the things he says now. The lies he's told in the last 8 years are just disgusting.
It's a pathological lie. You know, saying we've ruined the band's legacy and ruined reggae music.
Really, we're starting again. We're trying to reclaim the name before the legacy's destroyed.
This is the worst case I've seen in 45 years in the business. It's split the band, it's split a family. It's a sad story, very sad story.
Welcome to the Juggle Punch Folk Song Club in Birmingham. This is the Ian Campbell Folk Group, and our first song is The Cockfight.
Come all you colliers far and near, I'll tell of a cockfight when and where. Out on the moor I heard them say atween a black and a bonny grey.
My family ran the biggest folk club in the country for many years throughout the 60s. It was at Digbeth Civic Hall. And it was like hundreds every week, huge. You know, nothing like your average folk club now.
It was massive and lots of people played there, you know. Many different, you know, Paul Simon, you know, all sorts of people. And half of them ended up sleeping on the settee at our house, you know. So we were surrounded by music all of our lives.
Me and Ali were on stage in my dad's club. Ali and I were on stage when he was 5, so I must have been 6, you know, and playing penny whistle when I was a kid, and, you know, we always talked about being Britain's answer to the Jackson 5, but, you know, things change.
Me, Rob and Dunk, we used to sing together, yeah. We did 3-part harmonies, yeah. I can remember my mum coming in thinking it was the radio when the 3 of us were singing, you know. And we got quite tight.
Well, the cock's day, I think the grey was tossed.
Obviously, the influence of our father is great because we grew up surrounded by music and musicians. All of our lives, if you showed any interest at all, he would thrust an instrument in your hands, you know, and say, I'll get you lessons if you want, you know. But like most kids, you're diametrically opposed to what your parents are into, you know, so we were looking for something else. The area we grew up in was an immigrant area, so I was hearing Jamaican pop music from the age of 8 or something, you know, that's what I heard.
People get ready to do rock steady.
We grew up in South Birmingham, in Borsall Heath. The music of the streets was reggae, and the music in the youth clubs we went to was reggae. So we thought everybody loved reggae, but it was only in our small area of Borsall Heath. You know, when we went to secondary school, we realised everybody else was listening to something entirely different, called Gary Glitter and Mark Bolan and David Bowie, you know. It just, that all went over my head, you know. I didn't get into any of that music.
Half of our firm, our gang, were West Indian kids, Jamaican kids primarily. And they had music coming from Jamaica, their mums and dads or elder brothers and sisters. And that's where we got our music, and it was reggae.
If you were to take 8 people out of Borsall Heath, where we come from, 8 kids would have looked like us, you know. You didn't choose your friends according to their colour, you know, they were just your friends.
Most of us went to school together in Borsall Heath, right in the central Birmingham. Proper mates. We always spoke about starting a band right from 13, 14 years old. But you got to remember, we left school in 1975 in Birmingham, and it was, you know, there was no jobs. There truly was no jobs for anybody. Mass unemployment. And we figured we'd have more chance of starting a band than we would getting a real job. That's no kidding.
We always talked about being musicians, never, without it ever coming to anything. And I think that really the thing that changed it all, that made us serious, was first of all seeing Bob Marley live in '76, I think it was. He came to Birmingham and we went to see him, and that made me decide that that was what I wanted to do, you know. I really wanted to be in a reggae band. And I think the same for Ali, but we still didn't actually do it. And it wasn't until Ali got compensation for damage to his eye in a pub fight that he had the money, because he'd never been employed, so he'd never had the money to buy an instrument, you know. So when he got compensation, he bought himself a guitar. I think he also bought our very first set of drums, but that was kind of the catalyst.
The first rehearsal that we had, we hired a room and we all turned up there. In fact, we got 8 of us and all our gear in a minivan and tried to rehearse, but we didn't know how to rehearse. Robin knew the chords to House of the Rising Sun. That was it.
I was the only one that could play chords, and I'm trying to teach people chords and stuff, and they're not listening. It was just total anarchy, you know. And I just said, OK, it's never going to happen, is it, you know? And I left.
So Jimmy, the drummer, Earl, the bass player, and myself went and rehearsed for 6 months until we could play. And we did that by playing records and copying them, you know. And other people started drifting in as it started to sound like music.
I lived in this bedsit flat in Moseley, and Earl, the bass player, lived next door in a bedsit. And underneath, there was a big cellar that you could get to from the outside of the building. You know, those big tenement houses, big Victorian houses. And we claimed this cellar, and nobody used it. It was full of leaves. So we made it ours, stole our electricity off a Hell's Angel, proper badged up Hell's Angel, who lived upstairs, who was the greatest guy, who knew all about it, and said, don't worry, you know, just stop playing at 6 o'clock when I get home. And we practiced every day.
And then after a few months, I went down with Duncan and listened, and Brian was playing there as well, and they actually were making a sound, you know, that was close to music. And I was impressed enough that they meant it, you know. I believed that they meant it enough for me to commit, you know. Although Duncan wasn't. Duncan just said, no, it's never going to happen, you know. And I just said, come on, the 3 of us singing, you know, it'll be good, you know. Let's do it. And of course, he didn't and I did.
People think I turned down joining a band, but I didn't turn down joining a band. I turned down joining a project that was some way off, you know. Nobody had any instruments or knew how to play them, but they were going to work all that out. And there's lots of people who always say, you know, I was given the chance to be a part of that, but to be honest, I was busy. It didn't seem all that appealing at the time.
He said he had a job as a croupier going to Barbados. He went, fuck this, I'm going to Barbados. You know, who can blame him? We were in a damp cellar in Moseley. Couldn't even play, we knew 3 chords, C, F and G.
They were all in that band because they knew Ali. Most of them were his schoolmates. One of them was his brother. So he was undoubtedly the founder. And Ali actually came to see me. Well, Ali and Robin came to visit me and told me that they were starting a band. But I couldn't have joined if I'd wanted to, because I was in prison at the time.
We rehearsed for almost a year, playing any tune that we particularly loved at that time. You know, a reggae tune that was out in current. We were learning, and slowly learning to write songs. We had a lot of instrumentals with no words and melodies on, which we always had traditionally instrumentals on albums, which was just, we couldn't write words to go with that piece of music.
I think at the time we were nearly going to go out as Jeff Cancer and the Nicotinies. That's because at the time it was, you know, post-punk, polystyrene and X-ray specs, and, you know, they had funny names, so we were Jeff Cancer. I was Jeff Cancer in the band with the Nicotinies for a while.
We didn't really care what we was going to be called. You know, all we was interested in was actually playing music, and the name come from the suggestion of a friend of ours. He says, well, why don't you call yourselves UB40?
You know, you're all on the dole. You've all got a UB40 card. It makes sense. It gives us 3 million card-carrying fans instantly.
we'd start playing gigs, but we'd only play in Birmingham once every 4 weeks, 5 weeks. So it didn't look like we were desperate. We didn't want people to think that was the only gigs we had. We wanted to make out like we were precious. And we put posters up in the street with just our name on, UB40. And then people would tell us, oh, have you seen that band? And they hadn't seen us because we hadn't played at those places. And hype, you know, we were hyping.
We shirt-tailed the two-tone movement, you know. We wouldn't have got a lot of gigs if it hadn't been for the two-tone movement. We were never a part of it, but we sort of got a lot of gigs. We got gigs with The Beat and with Madness and Selector and stuff, and we did those. But we didn't go down too well. We were spat at and seek-hiled, basically, by the skinheads in the audience, because we weren't fast enough. But it got us gigs and it got us exposure, and eventually we took off.
Been to the governor of Louisiana, you may get an answer to process this love. Federal government too much to help him. It's been 85 years and I won't let it go. Tyler is guilty, what judge said so. What right do we have to say it's not so?
Chrissie Hynde from the Pretenders saw us playing in, there's a little gig in Covent Garden called the Rock Garden. She came to see us playing and she was #1 at the time, and we were going, oh, that's that girl off the telly, and, you know, with a #1 record, we didn't know her name, really. We didn't, do you know what I'm saying? And they asked us to go on tour with them.
Got this in pocket.
I just got the Pretenders together. We had our first album out, and I think we had our first and last #1, which was had just come out. And we were looking for a band to tour with, and my bass player, Pete Farndon, said there's a great reggae band. You know, we all were big fans of reggae, of course, because in the punk scene, that's all anyone listened to. And he said, go down to the Rock Garden in Covent Garden and see this band, this little band. So I went down, and there they were. They weren't signed or anything, but it wasn't a little band, you know, the whole place was full of them. And so I sort of went backstage to, very sheepishly I might add, ask if they would want to support my band. I felt that was kind of a pompous thing to do, but I zeroed in on Brian because he was clearly the most accessible, friendly one. Unfortunately, I couldn't understand a word he said. You know, I had to use the others to interpret what he said. But I mean, they were just a great band. And we toured with them. They came on our first tour.
And it was terrifying because it was so quick, you know. We'd literally been playing our instruments about 8 or 9 months, and suddenly we're on stage supporting the Pretenders in front of 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 people, and we were absolutely terrified.
I'm a British subject, not proud of it, but I carry the burden of shame.
When we started, 1979, in them days, if you weren't political, you weren't worth listening to. If you weren't on an independent label, you weren't worth, you were pretend. You were being hyped by one of the big multinationals, you know.
Everybody was left-wing in the band, but varying degrees of left-wing, you know. So you had to write a lyric everyone felt comfortable with, and that was the only rule, really. We didn't set out to write political songs. We didn't set out to change the world politically, you know. It's just that when you write your own songs, you're going to write about things that are important to you or things that you get emotional about, you know. So we wrote political lyrics, you know. We weren't very good at writing love songs, actually. When we started, we were a bit embarrassed about it, you know.
Well, we were kind of political, you know, politicised, disenfranchised, you know. We'd been unemployed for 3 years since we'd been left school at 15, 16 years old. And we were part of the Thatcher era. And if we were going to write our own stuff, we wanted to be able to, you know, say something relevant or sensible or whatever,
and
yeah.
The UB40 thing was supposed to be a positive thing, the fact that you really were at the bottom of the ladder if you were on the UB40. The only way was up, so.
That's why we called our first album Signing Off.
mean, I can remember walking through Moseley, I think, you know, when they'd only been going for a little while, and hearing a record out of somebody's house, and that was brilliant, you know. I couldn't believe that's my brother's that. Did you hear that, you know? And of course, within no time at all, they were all over the telly. I suppose there must have been some times when I must have had pangs of regret, but not jealousy. I mean, I was always chuffed to bits, you know, and proud to be the brother, and wasn't a bad position to be in.
I watched their first appearance on Top of the Pops. Top of the Pops was the one thing that everybody watched in prison, which I think was not because everyone was very keen on music. I think it was because of Legs and Co, or Pans people, or whatever they were called at the time. So I saw UB40 there when they first appeared.
We always thought that
it was going to be successful.
Yeah, we were quite sure of that, you know, and I think you have to have that. You know, when you start out, you've got to be a little bit arrogant, you know, and we had no need to, no reason for being arrogant. We were awful, really, you know. What you heard with the first album is what we'd learned to play so far, you know, and I can't actually listen to that album. I was proud of what it did for us, but it's all out of tune. You know, we weren't musicians, so we didn't know how to tune our instruments. They're great tunes on that album. It's just that we didn't know technically how to make the music that we wanted. So the saxophone that Brian was using was the wrong type of sax, tuned wrong. The bass wasn't tuned properly, you know. I was tuned to an open E chord, you know. So we've learned as we went along, you know, how to tune our instruments, but we were 3 albums in before we got it right, you know.
Get that screaming. Get that screaming. And we need you, let's strike up the band.
We're very much like a gang, you know. We decided from day one that we would share everything, all royalties, 8 ways, 8 equal ways. And that was an influence of my father's, because he told us about the business and how cutthroat it was, and how you should never trust a publisher, etc. So it just got rid of all those arguments that you hear, you know, musical differences, creative differences, you know, that tear other bands apart. It's because, you know, they feel like they're doing, you know, as much work, but the next guy who's writing all the songs is the guy earning all the money. So, you know, we just wiped those arguments out, you know. We just never had those rows.
I think that's one of the reasons why we carried on for so long, was because there weren't any infighting, you know, people getting more than somebody else, you know. I think that's why we lasted so long, you know.
I think a lot of our fans bought into that concept as well, the fact that we weren't like all the other bands that ended up arguing about money and stuff.
We didn't make good money for a long time. We were being offered big advances, you know, of 150 grand, you know, by certain major record labels and that, and we refused those because we wanted to go for the points.
We wanted the artistic control.
Yeah, and luckily we sold 8 million of the first album, so we were on great points, you know, and we didn't look back from there. And then we started our own record label.
We had plans to dominate the music world, of course, so before we had any money ourselves, we got a little studio together. We bought this old abattoir, disgusting old place in the middle of Birmingham, and cleaned it up ourselves. It was all big refrigerators with giant thick walls, so they were instantly kind of soundproofed. And we started a studio, you know, and we had that place for 25 years. Spent millions on it in the end, you know. The building cost 33 grand. And I think the last mixing desk we bought cost 275 grand.
My arms enfold the document, pushing down my head. My eyes are black and lifeless with an underprivileged state. I'm the baker on the corner with no one's spare a dime. I'm the job that never learns to read. There's no one's spare the time. I am the one in tech.
People wanted to hear what we were saying, obviously, you know, and 1 in 10 has become almost an iconic song from that time, that mid-80s Thatcher period, you know, and I think we did turn people on to reggae in ways that they would never have been turned on to it otherwise.
Our mission was to popularise reggae around the world because we'd, you know, been listening to it and grown up on it and loved it. We're a bit sort of evangelistic about it, but we just wanted to show people these great pop songs that we knew and loved. That's the reason for the Labour of Love series.
We wanted to do Labour of Love as the first album, but we were talked out of it by the record company.
Commercial suicide.
Yeah, it would be commercial suicide because you're known as the Dole Q band, you know, and you've got to write your own stuff, you're not a covers band and all that.
You'll be perceived as a cabaret act.
That's because record company people don't really know what they're talking about usually, you know, to tell the truth. And when we said we wanted to do, you know, Cherry O Baby and all this, they went, you can't. You're known for writing your own material.
Oh, Cherry O Baby, don't you know I'm in love with you? If you don't believe I do, then why don't you try it? I will never let you down. I will never make you feel no frown. You say that you love me, man, but babe, I'll accept you now.
We knew it would do well because they were all surefire hits as far as we were concerned, you know.
And we just knew that if the mainstream public got to hear these records, they'd fall in love with them just like we did.
We were always going to be covering our favourite reggae tunes, and when we realised moving out of Birmingham that actually most people hadn't heard these tunes, then that was a bonus because most people know Red Red Wine from our version, not from anybody else's version.
Stay close to me. Don't let me be alone. It's tearing apart my blues.
We were broke, completely broke, and I think we had a month's wages left, or even a week's wages it might have been when Red Red Wine went to #1, and we were saved. And it was a big sigh of relief, and wow, thank God for that. You know, it's not our last wages then, you know. So it was peaks and troughs all the way through our career.
Well, there's been so many of us. There was 8 of us in the band. And a manager, you know, and road crew. The road crew guys were our mates who didn't get instruments. If I had done it, it could have been a 12-piece band. I mean, the money came in, but it had to go a lot of ways. We weren't really living like, a Who or the Beatles until a few years after that.
To run Depp, it was kind of 90 grand a month, you know, and we ran that for 28 years. So if you add that up just on its own, that's a lot of dough. Touring, you know, it's very expensive. You've got all your airfares, your hotels, your PDs, your wages, you know. It's
the rider.
When there was 40 of you on the road, which there was in the early days, you know, it's an expensive business. Chrissie Hynde said with her looks and my voice we should do something together. And that was while we were on tour with her. So I went, go on then. And then she said it was her idea to do I Got You, Babe, which is nonsense, of course.
Well, of course, Ali will lie and say it was his idea to do I Got You, Babe, but they wouldn't have known that song. And, you know, obviously it was my idea. They would have never acted on it either because they can't get anything done. But I knew it would work with his voice and, you know, in that song.
We did I Got You, Babe, and then Breakfast in Bed were 2 big hits with her. They were great songs.
Well, I've recorded 2 songs with them. And then we, you know, over the years, I've got on stage with them and done things. I couldn't even understand what they're fucking talking about most of the time. But a real fun band. And I think that's the thing about them is they were such a band.
we released a record, it literally come out everywhere in the world. And not all bands could do that. And I think this was down to reggae, not UB40. I think everywhere you went, Indigenous people adopted reggae as the rebel music. That was their music. It represented them and their concerns and their politics, which very similar, you know. Anybody who's got under the boot, you know, can get the politics from rebel music and reggae. So we put a record out and go everywhere in the world. We go on tour, we go everywhere. You know, we go to Russia, all the South Pacific Islands, Tonga, Tahiti, the Hawaiian Islands, many, many times, you know, in Africa, everywhere. We'd be on the road sometimes for 9 and 10 months at a time.
There were definitely a lot of people that were hearing the music for the first time when they heard us, and were encouraged to maybe go and find out more about the music. I think we were part of building that recognition of reggae as a unique style of music. It's a beautiful thing, you know, there's been so many highlights over the years. Playing Madison Square Garden, sold out gig, #1 in America, album and single. An amazing, you know, you've reached the top. And then, of course, there was South Africa, where we were one of the first bands there after the ending of the boycott, sing our own song.
Playing that song in South Africa with Mandela out of prison and president and apartheid over, and after having observed the cultural boycott for, you know, the first, whatever it was, 15 years, to then go and play South Africa and sing that song to 70,000 people a night for 3 nights was, we still hold the live record in South Africa, you know. There's no other artist has played to 210,000 people in 3 days. So that was an amazing time. That was a hair up on the back of your neck moment, you know.
We were going around the world. You know, we were selling millions of CDs, which enabled us to do great big tours and fantastic light shows and things like that. You know, it was like a dream come true. Of course, a lot of money got wasted because, you know, we were smoking weed and doing coke, you know, and drinking. But that happened all the way through our career. You know, we'd make a lot of money and we'd spend it.
Wise men say only fools rush, but I can't falling in love with you.
My dad was incredibly proud of us. He just didn't like to say too much. In fact, he was given a Lifetime Achievement Award, and he gave a speech, and most of it was taken up with talking about what a fabulous job we'd done and how proud of us he was. So, you know, that was quite a surprise to me. He was really, for the first time publicly, acknowledging his son's success, which was really nice.
We were doing really well. We'd just had our biggest selling album. We'd just sold 10 million copies of Promises and Lies in America, and we'd just toured for 2 years solidly. So it was the most money we'd made up till then in our careers, you know. And it just went missing.
When we came back off tour, that was when we discovered that we were penniless. And not only penniless, but we were overdrawn, mortgaged to the hilt, and in deep stuck.
Suddenly, the studios closed down and there wasn't money for wages and stuff, and we were all really surprised. How did that happen?
It turned out that there were tens of millions of pounds that we'd never even been paid, that we should have had over the previous 20 years for record royalties. We never got them. For, you know, radio play and stuff like that, we never got paid for any of that. And we were, throughout the 80s, and 90s, we were probably the third most played band in the world on radio. So there we were. The bank were about to foreclose on the studio because we'd borrowed money on the strength of it without knowing it. So then we had to borrow £300,000 to stop the bank taking the studio. And we then spent the next 7, 8 years constantly in a cycle of borrowing money, recording, going on the road, and paying that money back.
I started asking questions, just normal questions about how much are we paying our staff, how come we were getting so little when we were playing sold-out gigs. We were selling out Wembley arenas and stuff, and we were getting peanuts for it, and I started saying, you know, what's going on, you know. So I brought in Bill Kerbishley, who's a famous manager in the business, to find out where the black hole was.
Initially, I thought everything was being handled really professionally and in a good way. It was only that after a period of time, I started realising that in order to survive, they were juggling lots of different balls here.
Having been up to Birmingham a couple of times and trying to sit them all down and trying to get the eight of them to focus on all of these things was virtually impossible. They were so stoned, all of them. All they did was smoke dope all the way through the meeting, and trying to get them to pay any attention to the questions that we were asking, because we weren't their business managers, we were their music managers.
There were certain things that came up. One was there were debts to certain banks, loans they'd had, which I was unaware of and had been prior to me joining them. There was a loan to an offshore company. They were repaying it at something like 33% interest. I asked who was behind this company, what was the reason for this loan, and didn't get very far. It then came out that the collateral for the loan was their catalogue rights, which I thought was absolutely abhorrent.
You know, you get used to living a certain way. And, you know, for 25 years we've been living like very wealthy people, you know, like millionaires. And that carries on. And if you've got somebody not saying to you, actually, you haven't paid, you owe £500,000 in tax. So you have to trust people. And it seems traditional in the music business. You don't get ripped off when you're a kid because you haven't made enough money to get ripped off or to not be noticed for a while. But when you get a certain way in, then there's enough money for somebody to go at.
The revenues that they must have made, particularly in that period in the 90s when it was arenas, they were a hard-working band. You know, they toured all the time. When you're playing multiple arenas in America, that's when you're making big money and selling the sort of numbers of records that they were selling. So it would have been awash with money at one stage. But the trail of where the money went, we could never find, you know, and that was a real problem.
Of course, we carried on living as we had been living, so we were living beyond our means, so we were getting into further debt. We carried on trying to finance our business and our lifestyle, and, you know, we were employing, I don't know, up to 30 people full-time. What we should have done was just closed everything down and started again, but we soldiered on, you know, in ever-decreasing circles.
By the time we took over, they really only had England and Holland as major markets where they could still play arenas, and everywhere else it was theatres. So, but they still toured as if they were an arena band. So there'd be 6 tons of freight going everywhere, which hammered the, you know, the monies that were coming in. And we kept saying, boys, why? And they were, no, this is how our production people tell us we need to tour. So I think a lot of it was on wasted cost. And to be honest, I think they were all very naive and just believed what they were told.
The band themselves are to a great extent to blame, because they would sit at meetings and all they cared about really, or the general feeling I got was all they cared about was their monthly drawings, their monthly salaries. But even when you look at that, it went nowhere near towards the gross income, not when you consider they had something like 35 top 30 singles. They used to sell out concerts. I mean, I can't really tell you what happened to that income.
There was obviously something was going on that I didn't know about. I was asking a lot of questions and I wasn't getting any answers. And even within the band, you know, I was asking band members questions and they were giving me answers that I knew were false. And So it was all going a bit weird.
Look, ego is a massive part of being a musician. If you haven't got any ego, you can't do it. Even people who profess, I'm not egotistical, they are. You can't do it unless you're proud of yourself and you can stand there and look people in the eye and say, yeah, listen to what I'm going to play now. Look what I'm going to do. And it's even more profound in singers. And I think he started thinking it was his band, he'd manifested his will and this is who we are. And we could see as he stood with his back to us every night of the week. Do you know what I mean, on stage? So anyway, I think Ali became increasingly unhappy as the music business is dying and this huge amount of money is not coming in. And I think he tried to continue living in the same style he'd become accustomed to and getting increasingly unhappy, and we were getting increasingly unhappy with his behaviour. We went to start a tour, and unless we paid a credit card bill he couldn't pay, he wasn't doing the tour. And that happened a few times. We go, no, we can't pay you your nonsense. Because there's less and less money coming in. You know, we've all got our own responsibilities. And so, you know, it didn't make us feel the happiest we'd ever felt.
There was a lot of stuff going down, and I never got any answers to any of the questions that I was asking, you know, for 4 years. I couldn't get any information. To this day, I still don't know what happened to the money. And because I was asking questions, they started to demonise me as the nutter, and, you know, I didn't know what I was talking about. So I was singled out and I ended up having to leave.
It's not what happened. It's not really down to how I remember it, it's down to exactly what happened, which was he told us he'd been offered money to do a solo tour. And we, having already delayed the release of our album by 6 months so that he could promote his album while we were on tour, we then balked at the idea of him doing a summer tour in the middle of our tours. We said, you know, we've got dates, we're already committed. And he said, well, I've been offered this money, I'm doing this tour. And we said, you can't, because we've got shows. And he said, I'm leaving then. And that was as simple as that.
He's a 50-year-old man. You start a solo career in your 50s. 50-year-old people don't take pop singers that seriously. Kids do. Teenagers take teenagers seriously. They don't take somebody the same age as their grandfather seriously. But in him doing that, we had to cancel an American tour, South American tour, and he cancelled it all because he said he'd booked a solo tour. And we went, we've had the advances of this, so that money had to go back.
The remaining members of UB40 have maintained all along that I left to pursue a solo career, which I have said is a lie. And this is my resignation letter. I refused to tour for more years for silly money in order to keep Reflex and its staff employed. Nothing at all has changed since we all decided things had to change. I don't agree with most of the band's recent decisions. I don't even know who makes them anymore. In short, I've had enough. And that's what happened. I never left to pursue a solo career. Why would I? You know, I would have done that with the first solo album I made in 1994 when we were at the peak of our careers, you know. That's when I would have gone solo if I'd wanted to at all. But I never intended to go solo ever. It was my band. Them saying that, you know, I was going to let them down and we'd been paid for gigs. The gigs we'd been paid for and contracted to do, I did.
He did the Australian tour and one gig in Africa on the way home, which I think was Uganda. And then he walked off the stage after the Uganda gig and never saw him again.
How many sell-out shows we did and how much money we earned, there was never any money at the end of the tour. And you have to remember, Ali had been asking for years to look at the books and just being...
4 years,
just being told, oh, we forgot to bring you in, we'll bring you in next week, and just the same thing over and over again. I knew they were committing commercial suicide if they were willing to let Ali go.
When he left the band, he seems to think that they were going to go away. They were all going to go into retirement somewhere. but they're not going to, you know. And they were going to get another singer. Whatever happened, they were going to continue. I'm quite sure of that.
When Ali left, I then went to Duncan and offered him the job as our new vocalist. And he had just said to me that, yes, he'd love the job, but he wouldn't do it without Ali's blessing, which infuriated me, actually, because, you know, I was saying, Ali's just walked out on us, you know, why have you got to ask Ali? And he said, because he's my kid brother and I won't do it. I want to do it, but I won't do it unless he's okay with it.
Duncan phones me up, drunk, and says, I've joined the band, Ali. And I went, you are kidding. And he went, no, I'm not kidding. And I said, well, I'm very disappointed in you, but I can't tell you not to, you know. But I'm seriously disappointed in you, Duncan.
I immediately rang Ali and told him that I'd been offered the chance to do it, and if he didn't want me to, I wouldn't do it. But he says, well, I can't say I'm pleased about it, but of course I wouldn't ask you not to. And I said, okay, fine. Unfortunately, he's never spoken to me since that day. I don't really, I don't see how that's a betrayal.
All he did was accept Ali's job when it was offered to him. And he is broken-hearted, because he and Ali were the closest of all of us, because they're less than a year apart in age. And Duncan is very, very unhappy to have lost his little brother.
When Ali left, that kind of reinvigorated us, you know, because it had to, you know, and we were in shock, you know, and traumatised. And yeah, we had something to prove, but also the fans' reaction to Duncan was so good that it just gave us a new lease of life, you know. We knew we could carry on. We knew that, you know, we'd got somewhere to go.
To be honest, I thought it was only something I could fail at. It's just a matter of how badly I did. You know, I thought it was a sort of, I don't know, a cleaning up process, a fizzling out type thing, you know. Ali certainly didn't think there was much hope for us. But it seemed an obvious choice to see if I could do it, because it'll keep you know, the brother blend with Rob and all the rest of it, and I'm able to do it, and it's worked.
He was very highly strung about it for a long time, because he had big shoes to fill, you know, and he went from, you know, playing small folk clubs with his dad, you know, sometimes, to suddenly playing to, you know, thousands in arenas, you know, and travelling all over the world. And yeah, it was terrifying for him. But as he became instantly accepted, then he learnt to accept the idea himself.
If you say that you love me madly, maybe I accept you gladly.
I stayed on with the others, but then, like, you know, I found myself constantly phoning the office to find out what's happening. Are we getting paid this week? And then when I've got certain members going, well, the trustees aren't after my house, you know, I'm okay, Jack, you know. And I'm supposed to sit here, you know, after selling my house to pay off debts. Consequently, I've paid my share of the debt, but I've also paid other members of the band's debts who are still sitting pretty in their houses, haven't been disrupted one iota. It just made my blood boil, and there's no way I could actually physically go out on the road and, you know, be in that person's company without wanting to smack him in the face. And so I thought, best thing to do, leave.
It was terribly painful, really, because we felt like he'd been a complete Judas. He came to us and he said, I'm so skint, I've got no money. We gave him all the money we had in a bank account. He said, I'm leaving if I can't get any money. We went, well, we can't give you the money you want because it isn't there, but have this. And it was everything we had in the company accounts. And he left the next morning.
Well, you didn't want to stay around to continue with the country vibe as well, did you?
That was totally the last. That was the last straw. That really was. And this Getting Over the Storm album, I found myself trying to convince my mates that, oh, it could work. And like, they're just looking at me like, don't know where your head's at, mate, but yeah, that ain't reggae.
Well, the whole decision was ridiculous to make a country album. They're the biggest selling reggae band in the world, you know, and they decided to make a country album. It's a slap in the face to the fans who've, you know, bought all our records all along. It's a slap in the face to Astro, and it's certainly a slap in the face to me as I started UB40 to promote reggae, you know. And for them to do a country album, it's still jaw-dropping stuff for me.
We released an album with like a country-influenced album, and he attacked it furiously, you know, saying we've ruined the band's legacy and ruined reggae music. It's fucking ridiculous. We're musicians, we're just trying other stuff, and it's a very successful record. All around the world we're going, people know the songs, and it paid for itself. And the best review we've ever had for it is Ali Campbell. He's made it his mission in life to run us down, and he's given us a terrible hard time in the press. Whereas as a band, UB40, we've stayed away from it. Because it's just not very sophisticated. It's just a bit wanky, and it's, you know, to run people down and talk about people when they're not there to defend themselves.
I would take anything Brian says with a pinch of salt, you know, because they've sort of launched this
hate campaign.
Yeah, a campaign to discredit me, you know.
It's absolutely true, because when Ali left, I can remember the band saying, right, we'll just take the moral high ground, and we say no. And I'm in total agreement with that, because as far as I'm concerned, this just involves the band. It doesn't concern anybody else outside. Within 4 hours of Ali leaving, poor little Brian's little fingers were tapping away, just assassinating Ali by the second, and then Jimmy Brown, the drummer, he jumped in, and they haven't stopped since. They just haven't stopped. It's just been relentless. And the same thing's happened with me. I mean, when I left, you know, there's beautiful quotes from fans as, you know, sorry to see you go, thanks for the memories, etc., etc. 5 hours later, Jimmy Brown, straight away, you know.
He's been caught with his hands in the till, which is what he said about me.
Don't let him fool you. This is all about money. He wanted more than everybody else, you know. This is the man who hasn't spent a penny on repaying the loans, you know, so let him get on with it.
It's a difficult one for me, this, because Ali was my best friend when we were children. My best friend. He was the best man at my wedding. We were best mates. We lived next door to each other in Jamaica. We went on holiday together, always, with our families and kids. So it's very painful. He's not the guy I grew up with and knew. And we've come to a point where we've got to defend ourselves. Not for egotistical reasons, not for personal reasons, but I've got to defend my friends, his brothers, and I've got to defend my partners here from the shit that gets written about him coming out of his mouth.
I take it that there's no chance of you all getting back together again?
No. It will, about 10 minutes after hell has frozen over.
No, I don't care what he does, really, you know. He's, the vitriol that he's heaped on me and, you know, fellow band members and Duncan, the lies he's told in the last 8 years are just disgusting. You know, I've lost all feeling, really. You know, I've become numb to the whole thing. And to be honest, I'd rather not get back together with him.
I'd love it, but as I say, he hasn't spoken to me since that day, and he doesn't keep in touch with the family. I mean, he doesn't live in Birmingham anymore, as we all still do. And Dad passed away, and Ali didn't come to the funeral, or couldn't come to the funeral, whatever. We haven't seen him. It's unfortunate.
What has happened is our family has been ripped asunder, you know, it's been ripped apart, you know. My father, before he died, refused to talk to me because he took Duncan's side and Robin's side, you know, and to say I didn't make Dad's funeral, I was in New Zealand at the time, you know what I mean? That's just a nasty, silly thing to say.
It's very disappointing that Ali's behaved the way he has, you know. But not altogether surprising when you've lived with him as long as I have. My mum refuses to take sides, you know, we're all her boys, and she loves us equally and treats us the same and refuses to become embroiled.
It's just become so poisonous, the whole situation. It's particularly sad for our mother, who has said to me that she's always taken comfort from the knowledge that her 4 lads were there for each other. And she's had to accept that that simply isn't the case now.
They're trying to sue us, and we've got to defend ourselves. Their argument is that we're passing off as UB40. Our argument is that they're passing off because they've never said that it's not the original lineup, and they've never said UB40 featuring Duncan Campbell or featuring Duncan, Robin and Brian. We always make it very clear who comes to see us. It's UB40 featuring Ali, Astro and Mickey. They know that if they have to go out with UB40 featuring Duncan Campbell, that they'll never get a booking. And we're playing the O2, selling it out.
The guys that left the band of their own accord, you know, leaving us, the remaining members of the band, to carry on as UB40. Until they used the name, Ali's career hadn't happened. And then it dawned on him that when he went to Africa and places like that and he sold himself as UB40, then he suddenly thought, I can do this everywhere. And that was what he did.
I don't see why this couldn't be resolved very easily. But of course, once emotions get involved and bad feeling from the past and accusations, it gets very muddy and nobody has any rationale or common sense. But this could have been resolved a long time ago.
Both parties are in for £250,000 already, and as soon as you start the ball rolling like this, it's very difficult to stop it, you know, because if they walk away with their hands down, they have to pay our costs. And if we do the same, then we have to pay their costs. So it just has to keep going, and the only people that, you know, that win are the lawyers, obviously.
We're prepared to go as far as we have to go. And we've already, again, you know, broken ourselves spending money for 2 years on lawyers. Very expensive lawyers, you know. We're prepared to go as far as we have to go to be able to use our name.
I've never seen a whole band suffer to this degree. They've been cleaved down the middle in terms of family members. They're all at odds with each other. They've all lost their houses and they've all been bankrupt. It doesn't get much worse than that. It's quite stunning in a way, because when I first joined them, I really thought they were a bunch of happy-go-lucky guys, and for them, none of them, to be seen to have the rewards from their previous hard work, it just doesn't make sense.
I'd love to think that somewhere there's this big pot of money that the 8 boys who made up this fantastic band would be able to get hold of, but I don't think it exists. I think it's just been frittered away or been skimmed off over the years.
It's quite fitting as well that they had an album called Promises and Lies, because it seems to me that's what's been their motto of their career, Promises and Lies. And it's a sad story, very sad story.
Every line I call your name, we're still together just the same. Celebrate my name, lonely room and empty bed. Always seems that way. Yes, it always seems that way.
Really, it's starting again. We're trying to reclaim the name before the legacy's destroyed. As soon as Astro came back and played with us, the fans have just, they're loving it, you know, and really it seems they feel it's a solution that finally, you know, we've reunited again and we're back flying the flag for reggae. So yeah, it's looking good for us. And I think it was inevitable. Fans, you know, will vote with their feet. You know, we'll never get back together again. There's been too much skullduggery, you know. And musically, I wouldn't want to play with those guys again because the band I've got now is a lot better. There's no egos involved in our UB40, you know. And the music's better.
Since Ali left 8 years ago, we've been recording, performing as UB40. And I still love my life, you know. I still pinch myself every day that I've had the life I've had, so I'm not about to be twisted and bitter, and I'm not about to let that kind of thing consume me, you know. It's not worth it. That time's gone. I had a wonderful time living while it was going on. I still enjoy my life. It's not as comfortable as it should be, but, you know, it's a lot more comfortable than it would have been if I had never been in UB40. And we'll keep going until we drop, you know.
Never was a better time for trying to set the worst to hammer. Some dreams that won't come true. Every night I call your name.